Hi, biography students. It was great seeing everybody yesterday on Zoom and looking forward to our meetings on Friday. I wanted to take a few minutes to share a poem and a couple of thoughts with you today. So this is a poem written by Archibald MacLeish, a name that by now should be quite familiar to you, thanks to chapter 3 of Chronicles. And the poem is titled Ars Poetica, which is Latin for the art of poetry. And it's a title that MacLeish borrowed from the ancient Roman poet Horace. So it's not that long. Give it a listen. Ars Poetica. A poem should be palpable and mute as a globed fruit, dumb as old medallions to the thumb, silent as the sleeve-worn stone of casement ledges where the moss has grown. A poem should be wordless as the flight of birds. A poem should be motionless in time as the moon climbs, leaving, as the moon releases, twig by twig, the night-entangled trees, leaving, as the moon behind the winter leaves, memory by memory, the mind. A poem should be motionless in time as the moon climbs. A poem should be equal to, not true, for all the history of grief, an empty doorway and a maple leaf. For love, the leaning grasses and two lights above the sea. A poem should not mean, but be. So that's Ars Poetica by Archibald MacLeish. And rather than go through it line by line with you, I'll just offer a couple thoughts about the ending. He offers two images, one for the history of grief, an empty doorway and a maple leaf, and then another for love, leaning grasses and two lights above the sea. And what he's suggesting there is that a poem should or can offer images that convey meaning more effectively than a concrete statement of feeling or an idea that the poet has. Let the images do the talking, the conveying. And the final couplet, a poem should not mean but be, suggests to me that audiences, people who are listening to or reading the poem, they bring their own feelings and interpretations when they hear or read that poem, and that the poet should not feel the need to convey meaning concretely. That, again, imagery, carefully chosen metaphors, experiences can convey meaning again, more effectively than any sort of ideological statement on the poet's part. And that the poem can exist by itself, apart from the poet, apart from anyone, like the moon floating in the sky. The poem takes on a life of its own, separate from any single person's mind. So that reminds me of Bob Dylan's interaction with Archibald MacLeish in chapter 3. I'll come to that in a moment. You might recall that Dylan, in chapter 3, felt like there was too much pressure being put on him by the press, by the public, to be a kind of savior, to be a leader for his generation. I'll just read you a line from the middle of page 115. The big bugs in the press kept promoting me as the mouthpiece, spokesman, or even conscience of a generation. That was funny. All I'd ever done was sing songs that were dead straight and expressed powerful new realities. So he's placing the emphasis on the songs that he was writing and performing more so than on himself as some sort of leader. And then on page 116 toward the top, I really was never any more than what I was, a folk musician who gazed into the gray mist with tear-blinded eyes and made up songs that floated in a luminous haze. And that image itself calls to mind MacLeish's description of the moon in Ars Poetica. being motionless in time as the moon climbs. So I see a real similarity there between the way Dylan describes his songs and the way that MacLeish writes about what a poem is or should be in his poem Ars Poetica. And then, of course, in Chapter 3, Dylan visits with Archibald MacLeish twice, and the first time, MacLeish actually interprets some of Dylan's songs for him. John Brown is one of them, and MacLeish suggests that really it's a poem about mothers and different types of mothers, biological, honorary. And Dylan replies by saying, well, I'd never really thought about it that way, but yeah, I guess you're right, could be. Which is an example of this very notion that Dylan really does believe, that he's open to the possibility of someone else bringing meaning to one of his songs, meaning that is insightful, is accurate, and that he himself, the songwriter, didn't necessarily even have in mind. So again, the work takes on a life of its own, and other people can experience it in unique ways that are right, even though the poet or songwriter didn't have that in mind. And one last point in Chapter 4, which you recently finished reading, the key to success in making the album Oh Mercy in, I think it was 1989, down in New Orleans with the producer Daniel Lanois, the key, according to Dylan, is that Lanois and Dylan had to reach a kind of understanding, and that is that Dylan was not looking to exhibit or convey any sort of deeply held beliefs or message about his identity through these songs, but rather he wanted Lanois, his producer, to simply accept the songs for what they were. And once they reached that understanding, then they could work together effectively through this, what was a really arduous process, but a worthwhile one, because it resulted in an album that Dylan is proud of and has stood the test of time, and that's Oh Mercy. So that's it for today. Looking forward to seeing you all on Friday. Take care.